Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. We're continuing reading from Robinson Crusoe, and today we are starting with Chapter 2, Adventures in Africa. In this state of life, however, I remain some time uncertain what measures to take and what course of life to lead. An irresistible reluctance continued to going home, and as I stayed a while, the remembrance of the distress I had been in wore off, till at last I quite laid aside the thoughts of it. That evil influence which carried me first away from my father's house, that hurried me into the wild notion of raising my fortune, and that impressed those conceits so forcibly upon me as to make me deaf to all good advice, and to the entreaties and even the command of my father, I say the same influence, whatever it was, presented the most unfortunate of all enterprises to my view, and I went on board a vessel bound to the coast of Africa, or as our sailors vulgarly call it, a voyage to Guinea. It was my great misfortune that in all these adventures I did not ship myself as a sailor, whereby, though I might indeed have worked a little harder than ordinary, yet at the same time I should have learned the duty and office of a foremast man, and in time might have qualified myself for a mate or a lieutenant, if not for a master. But as it was always my fate to choose for the worst, so I did here. For having money in my pocket and good clothes upon my back, I would always go on board in the habit of a gentleman, and so I neither had any business in the ship nor learned to do any. It was my lot, first of all, to fall into pretty good company in London, which does not always happen to such loose and unguided young fellows as I then was. I became acquainted with the master of a ship who had been on the coast of Guinea, and who, having had very good success there, was resolved to go again. He took a fancy to my conversation, which was not at all disagreeable at that time, and hearing me say that I had a mind to see the world, he told me that if I would go to the voyage with him, I should be at no expense. I should be his messmate and his companion, and if I could carry anything with me, I should have all the advantage of it that the trade would admit, and perhaps I might meet with some encouragement. I embraced the offer, and entering into a strict friendship with this captain, who was an honest and plain-dealing man, I went the voyage with him and undertook a small adventure in which, by the disinterested honesty of my friend the captain, I was very successful. I carried about 40 pounds in such toys and trifles as the captain directed me to buy. This 40 pounds I had mustered together by the assistance of some of my relations whom I corresponded with, and who, I believe, got my father, or at least my mother, to contribute so much as that to my first adventure. This was the only voyage which I may say was successful in all my adventures, and which I owe to the integrity and honesty of my friend the captain, under whom I got a complete knowledge of the mathematics and the rules of navigation, learned how to keep an account of the ship's course, take an observation, and in short, to understand some things that were needful to be understood by a sailor. As he took delight to instruct me, I took delight to learn, and in a word, this voyage made me both a sailor and a merchant, for I brought home 5 pounds 9 ounces of gold dust for my adventure. This yielded me in London at my return almost 300 pounds, and my success filled me with those aspiring thoughts which have since so completed my ruin. Yet even in this voyage I had my misfortunes too. I was continually sick, being thrown into a violent fever by the excessive heat of the climate. Our principal trading was upon the coast from the latitude of 15 degrees north even to the line itself. I was now set up for a Guinea trader. To my great misfortune, my friend died soon after his arrival, but I resolved to go the same voyage again. I embarked in the same vessel with one who was the mate in the former voyage, and had now got the command of the ship. This was the unhappiest voyage that ever man made, for though I did not carry quite 100 pounds of my new-gained wealth, so that I had 200 pounds left, which I lodged with my friend's widow, who was very just to me, yet I fell into terrible misfortunes in this voyage. Our ship, making her course toward the Canary Islands, or rather between those islands and the African shore, was surprised in the gray of the morning by a Turkish rover of Sally, who gave chase to us with all the sail she could make. We crowded also as much canvas as our yards would spread, as our masts carry, to have got clear, but finding that the pirate had gained upon us, and would certainly come up with us in a few hours, we prepared to fight. Our ship had 12 guns, and the rogues 18. About 3 in the afternoon he came up with us, and bringing to by mistake just athwart our quarter instead of athwart our stern as he intended, we brought 8 of our guns to bear on that side and poured in a broadside upon him, which made him sheer off again after returning our fire and pouring in almost his small shot from about 200 men which he had on board. However, we had not a man touched, all our men keeping close. He prepared to attack us again, and we to defend ourselves, but laying us on board the next time upon our other quarter, he entered 60 men upon our decks, who immediately fell to cutting and hacking the decks and rigging. We plied them with small shot, half-pikes, powder chests, and such like, and cleared our deck of them twice. However, to cut short this melancholy part of our story, our ship being disabled, and 3 of our men killed and 8 wounded, we were obliged to yield and were carried all prisoners into Sally, a port belonging to the Moors. The usage I had there was not so dreadful as at first I apprehended, nor was I carried up the country to the emperor's court as the rest of our men were, but was kept by the captain of the rover as his proper prize, and made his slave, being young and nimble and fit for his business. At this surprising change of my circumstances, from a merchant to a miserable slave, I was perfectly overwhelmed, and now I looked back upon my father's prophetic discourse to me, that I should be miserable and have none to relieve me. As my new patron or master had taken me home to his house, so I was in hopes that he would take me with him when he went to sea again, believing that it would at some time or other be his fate to be taken by a Spanish or Portuguese man of war, and that then I should be set at liberty. But this hope of mine was soon taken away, for when he went to sea, he left me on shore to look after his little garden, and do the common drudgery of slaves about his house, and when he came home again from his cruise, he ordered me to lie in the cabin to look after the ship. Here I meditated nothing but my escape, and what method I might take to effect it, but found no way that had the least probability in it, for I had nobody to communicate it to that would embark with me. No fellow slave, no Englishman, Irishman, or Scotchman there but myself. So for 2 years, though I often pleased myself with the imagination, yet I never had the least encouraging prospect of putting it in practice. After about 2 years, an odd circumstance presented itself which put the old thought of making some attempt for my liberty again in my head. My patron lay at home longer than usual without fitting out his ship, which, as I heard, was for want of money. He used constantly, once or twice a week, sometimes oftener if the weather was fair, to take the ship's pinnace and go out into the road fishing. He always took me and a young Moresco with him to row the boat, and we made him very merry. I proved very dexterous in catching fish, so that sometimes he would send me with a Moor, one of his kinsmen, and the youth, the Moresco as they called him, to catch a dish of fish for him. It happened one time that as we went fishing in a stark, calm morning, a fog rose so thick that though we were not half a league from the shore, we lost sight of it, and rowing we knew not whither or which way, we labored all day and all the next night, and when the morning came, we found we had pulled off to sea instead of pulling in for shore, and that we were at least 2 leagues from the shore. However, we got well in again, though with a great deal of labor and some danger, for the wind began to blow pretty fresh in the morning, but particularly we were all very hungry. But our patron, warned by this disaster, resolved to take more care of himself in the future. He resolved that he would not go fishing any more without a compass and some provisions. So he ordered the carpenter of his ship, who was also an English slave, to build a little stateroom or cabin in the middle of the long boat, like that of a barge, with a place to stand behind it, and to steer and hail home the main sheet, and room before for a hand or two to stand and work the sails. She sailed with what we call a shoulder of mutton sail, and the boom jibbed over the top of the cabin, which lay very snug and low, and had in it room for him to lie with a slave or two, and a table to eat on, with some small lockers to put in his bread, rice, and coffee. We frequently went out with this boat fishing, and as I was most dexterous to catch fish for him, he never went without me. It happened one time that he had decided to go out in this boat, either for pleasure or for fish, with 2 or 3 Moors. He therefore sent on board the boat overnight a larger store of provisions than ordinary, and had ordered me to get ready 3 fusees, that's a flintlock musket, with powder and shot, which were on board his ship, since he designed some sport of fowling as well as fishing. I got all things ready as he directed, and waited the next morning with the boat washed clean, her flag and pennants out, and everything to accommodate his guest. By and by, my patron came on board alone, and told me that his guests had put off going upon some business that fell out, and ordered me with the man and boy as usual to go out with the boat and catch them some fish, because his friends were to sup at his house. He commanded that as soon as I got some fish I should bring it home to his house. All this I prepared to do. This moment my former notions of deliverance darted into my thoughts, for now I found that I was about to have a little ship at my command. As soon as my master was gone, I prepared to furnish myself not for a fishing business, but for a voyage, though I knew not, neither did I so much as consider, whither I should steer. Anywhere to get out of that place was my way. My first contrivance was to make a pretense to speak to this Moor to get more food on board. I told him that we must not presume to eat of our patron's bread. He said that that was true, and brought a large basket of rusks or biscuits of their kind, and 3 jars with fresh water into the boat. I knew where my patron's case of bottles stood, which it was evident by the make were taken out of some English prize, and I conveyed them into the boat while the Moor was on shore, as if they had been there before for our master. I conveyed also a great lump of beeswax into the boat, which weighed above 1/2 a hundredweight, with a parcel of twine or thread, a hatchet, a saw, and a hammer, all of which were of great use to us afterwards, especially the wax to make candles. Another trick I tried upon him, which he innocently came into also. His name was Ismael, but he was called Muley, or Moley, so I called to him, "Moley, our patron's guns are on board the boat. Can you not get a little powder and shot? It may be that we may kill some alcamies, a fowl like our curlews, for ourselves, for I know that he keeps the gunner's stores in the ship." "Yes," says he, "I'll bring some." Accordingly, he brought a great leather pouch which held about 1.5 pounds of powder, or rather more, and another with shot that had 5 or 6 pounds, with some bullets, and put all into the boat. At the same time, I had found some powder of my master's in the great cabin, with which I filled one of the large bottles in the case, which was almost empty, pouring what was in it into another. Thus furnished with everything needful, we sailed out of the port to fish. The men in the castle, which is at the entrance of the port, knew who we were, and took no notice of us. We were not above a mile out of the port before we hauled in our sail and set us down to fish. The wind blew from the north-northeast, which was contrary to my desire, for had it blown southerly, I had been sure to have made the coast of Spain, and at least reached the Bay of Cadiz. But my resolutions were, blow which way it would, I would be gone from that horrid place where I was, and leave the rest to fate. After we had fished some time and caught nothing, for when I had fish on my hook I would not pull them up that he might not see them, I said to the Moor, "This will not do. Our master will not be thus served. We must stand farther off." He, thinking no harm, agreed, and being in the head of the boat, set the sails. As I had the helm, I ran the boat out nearly a league farther, and then brought her to, as if I would fish. Then, giving the boy the helm, I stepped forward to where the Moor was, and making as if I stooped for something behind him, I took him by surprise with my arm under his legs, and tossed him clear overboard into the sea. He rose immediately, for he swam like a cork, and calling to me, begged to be taken in. He told me he would go all over the world with me. He swam so vigorously after the boat that he would have reached me very quickly, there being but little wind. Thereupon I stepped into the cabin, and securing one of the fowling pieces, I pointed it at him, and told him that I had done him no hurt, and if he would be quiet, I would do him none. "But," said I, "you swim well enough to reach the shore, and the sea is calm. Make the best of your way to shore, and I will do you no harm, but if you come near the boat, I'll shoot you through the head, for I am resolved to have my liberty." So he turned himself about and swam for the shore, and I make no doubt but he reached it with ease, for he was an excellent swimmer. I could have been content to have taken this Moor with me, but there was no venturing to trust him. When he was gone, I turned to the boy whom they called Zuri, and said to him, "Zuri, if you will be faithful to me, I'll make you a great man. But if you will not stroke your face to be true to me, that is, swear by Mahomet and his father's beard, I must throw you into the sea too." The boy smiled in my face and spoke so innocently that I could not mistrust him. He swore to be faithful to me and go all over the world with me. While I was in view of the Moor that was swimming, I stood out directly to sea with the boat rather stretching to windward, that they might think me gone toward the strait's mouth, as indeed anyone that had been in his wits must have been supposed to do. Who would have supposed that we would sail on to the southward, to the truly barbarian coast, where whole nations of Negroes were sure to surround us with their canoes and destroy us, where we could never once go on shore, but we should be devoured by savage beasts or more merciless savages of humankind. But as soon as it grew dusk in the evening, I changed my course and steered directly south and by east, bending my course a little toward the east, that I might keep in with the shore. Having a fairly fresh gale of wind and a smooth, quiet sea, I made such sail that I believe by the next day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I first made the land, I could not have been less than 150 miles south of Salé. I was quite beyond the dominions of the Emperor of Morocco, or indeed of any other king thereabouts, for we saw no people. Yet such was the fright I had taken at the Moors, and the dreadful apprehensions I had of falling into their hands, that I would not stop or go on shore or come to an anchor. The wind continued fair till I had sailed in that manner 5 days. When it shifted to the southward, I concluded that if any of our vessels were in chase of me, they also would now give up, so I ventured to make the coast. I came to an anchor in the mouth of a little river, I knew not what or where, neither what latitude, what country, what nation, or what river. I neither saw nor desired to see any people. The principal thing I wanted was fresh water. We came into this creek in the evening, resolving to swim to shore as soon as it was dark, and explore the country. But as soon as it was dark, we heard such dreadful noises of the barking, roaring, and howling of wild creatures of we knew not what kinds, that the poor boy was ready to die with fear, and begged me not to go on shore till day. "Oh, very well," said I. "Then I won't, but it may be that we may see men by day who will be as bad to us as those lions." "Then we give them the shoot guns," says Zuri, laughing. "Make them run away." Such English Zuri spoke by conversing among us slaves. However, I was glad to see the boy so cheerful, and I gave him a dram out of our patron's case of bottles to cheer him up. After all, Zuri's advice was good, and I took it. We dropped our little anchor and lay still all night. I say lay still, for we slept none, for in 2 or 3 hours we saw vast, great creatures, we knew not what to call them, of many sorts, come down to the seashore and run into the water, wallowing and washing themselves for the pleasure of cooling themselves. They made such hideous howlings and yellings that I never indeed heard the like. Zuri was dreadfully frightened, and indeed so was I. But we were both more frightened when we heard one of these mighty creatures come swimming toward our boat. We could not see him, but we might hear him by his blowing to be a monstrous, huge, and furious beast. Zuri said it was a lion, and it might have been so for aught I know. Poor Zuri cried to me to weigh the anchor and row away. "No," said I. "Zuri, we can slip our cable with a buoy to it and go off to sea. They cannot follow us far." I had no sooner said so, but I perceived the creature, whatever it was, within 2 oars' length, which surprised me. However, I immediately stepped to the cabin door, and taking up my gun, fired at him, upon which he turned about and swam toward the shore again. It is impossible to describe the horrible noises and hideous cries and howlings that were raised, as well upon the edge of the shore as higher within the country, upon the noise or report of the gun, a thing I have some reason to believe those creatures had never heard before. This convinced me that there was no going on shore for us in the night upon that coast. How to venture on shore when day came was another question too, for to have fallen into the hands of any of the savages had been as bad as to have fallen prey to lions and tigers. At least, we were equally apprehensive of the danger of it. Be that as it would, we were obliged to go on shore somewhere or other for water, for we had not a pint left in the boat. When or where to get it was the point. Zuri said that if I would let him go on shore with one of the jars, he would see if there was any water and bring some to me. I asked him why he would go, why I should not go and he stay in the boat. The boy answered with so much affection that I loved him ever after. Said he, "If wild men come, they eat me, you go away." "Well, Zuri," said I, "we will both go, and if the wild mans come, we will kill them. They shall eat neither of us." I gave Zuri a piece of rusk bread to eat and a dram out of our patron's case of bottles, which I mentioned before. Then we hauled the boat in as near the shore as we thought was proper, and waded to shore, carrying nothing but our guns and 2 jars for water. I did not care to go out of sight of the boat, fearing the coming of canoes with savages down the river, but the boy, seeing a low place about a mile up the country, rambled to it. By and by, I saw him come running toward me. I thought that he was pursued by some savage or frightened by some wild beast, and I ran forward toward him to help him, but when I came nearer to him, I saw something hanging over his shoulders. It was a creature that he had shot, like a hare, but different in color and with longer legs. We were very glad of it, and it was very good meat. However, the great joy that poor Zuri came with was to tell me that he had found good water and had seen no wild men. But we found afterwards that we need not take such pains for water, for a little higher up the creek where we were, we found the water fresh when the tide was out, which flowed but a little way up. We filled our jars and feasted on the hare we had killed, and prepared to go on our way, having seen no footsteps of any human creature in that part of the country. As I had been one voyage to this coast before, I knew very well that the islands of the Canaries and the Cape Verde Islands also lay not far off from the coast. But as I had no instruments to take an observation to know what latitude we were in, and did not exactly know, or at least remember, what latitude they were in, I knew not where to look for them, or when to stand off to sea toward them. Otherwise, I might now easily have found some of these islands. But my hope was that if I stood along this coast till I came to that part where the English traded, I should find some of their vessels upon their usual design of trade that would relieve and take us in. By the best of my calculation, that place where I now was must be that country which lies between the Emperor of Morocco's dominions and the Negroes, and is waste and uninhabited except by wild beasts. Once or twice in the daytime I thought I saw the peak of Tenerife, which is the high top of the mountain Tenerife in the Canaries. I had a great mind to venture out in hopes of reaching it, but having tried twice, I was forced in again by contrary winds, the sea also going too high for my little vessel, so I resolved to pursue my first design and to keep along the shore. Several times I was obliged to land for fresh water after we had left this place. Once, in particular, early in the morning, we came to anchor under a little point of land which was pretty high, and the tide beginning to flow, we lay still to go farther in. Zuri, whose eyes were more about him than it seems mine were, called softly to me and told me that we had best go farther off the shore. "For," said he, "look yonder lies a dreadful monster on the side of that hillock, fast asleep." I looked where he pointed and saw a great lion quietly taking his rest. Bidding Zuri lie still in the boat, I took our biggest guns, which was almost musket-bore, and loaded it with a good charge of powder and with 2 slugs, and laid it down. Then I loaded another gun with 2 bullets, and the third, for we had 3 pieces, I loaded with 5 smaller bullets. I took the best aim I could with the first piece, to have shot the lion in the head, but he lay so, with his leg raised a little above his nose, that the slugs hit his leg about the knee and broke the bone. He started up growling at first, but finding the leg broken, fell down again, and then got up upon 3 legs, and gave the most hideous roar that ever I heard. I was a little surprised that I had not hit him on the head. However, I took up the second piece immediately, and though he began to move off, fired again, and shot him in the head, and had the pleasure to see him drop and make but little noise, lie struggling for life. Then Zuri took heart, and would have me let him go on shore. "Well, go," said I. So the boy jumped into the water, and taking a little gun in one hand, swam to the shore with the other hand, and coming close to the creature, put the muzzle of the piece to his ear and shot him in the head again, which dispatched him quite. This was game indeed to us, but it was not food. I was very sorry to lose 3 charges of powder and shot upon a creature that was good for nothing to us. However, Zuri said he would have some of him, so he came on board and asked me to give him the hatchet. "For what, Zuri?" said I. "Me cut off his head," said he. However, Zuri could not cut off his head, but he cut off a foot and brought it with him, and it was a monstrous great one. I bethought myself, however, that perhaps the skin of him might one way or other be of some value to us, and I resolved to take off his skin if I could. So Zuri and I went to work with him, but Zuri was much the better workman at it, for I knew very ill how to do it. Indeed, it took us both the whole day, but at last we got the hide off him, and spread it on the top of our cabin, where the sun effectually dried it in 2 days. Afterwards it served me to lie upon. After this stop, we made on to the southward continually for 10 or 12 days, living very sparingly on our provisions, which began to abate very much, and going no oftener into the shore than we were obliged to for fresh water. My design in this was to make the river Gambia or Senegal, that is to say, anywhere about Cape Verde, where I was in hopes to meet with some European ship. If I did not, I knew not what course I had to take but to seek for the islands, or perish there among the Negroes. I knew that all the ships from Europe which sailed either to the coast of Guinea or to Brazil or to the East Indies made this cape or those islands. In a word, I put the whole of my fortune upon this single point, either that I must meet with some ship or must perish. When I had pursued this resolution about 10 days longer, as I have said, I began to see that the land was inhabited. In 2 or 3 places, as we sailed by, we saw people stand upon the shore to look at us. We could also perceive that they were quite black and stark naked. I was once inclined to have gone on shore to them, but Zuri was my better counselor and said to me, "No go, no go." However, I hauled in nearer the shore that I might talk to them, and I found that they ran along the shore by me a good way. I observed that only one had a weapon, a long, slender stick, which Zuri said was a lance. He told me that the savages could throw these lances a great way with good aim, so I kept at a distance, but talked with them by signs as well as I could, and particularly made signs for something to eat. They beckoned to me to stop my boat, and they would bring me some meat. Upon this, I lowered the top of my sail and lay by, and 2 of them ran up into the country, and in less than half an hour came back, bringing with them 2 pieces of dry flesh and some grain, which is the produce of their country. We neither knew what the one nor the other was, but we were willing to accept it. How to come at it was our next dispute, for I was not for venturing on shore to them, and they were as much afraid of us. However, they took a safe way for us all, for they brought it to the shore and laid it down, and when it stood a great way off till we had brought it on board. Then they came close to us again. We made signs of thanks to them, for we had nothing to make them amends, but an opportunity offered that very instant to oblige them wonderfully. While we were lying by the shore, there came 2 mighty creatures, one pursuing the other, as we took it, with great fury from the mountains toward the sea. We found the people terribly frightened, especially the women. The man that had the lance or dart did not fly from them, but the rest did. However, the 2 creatures did not seem to offer to fall upon any of the negroes, but plunged themselves into the sea and swam about as if they had come for their diversion. At last, one of them began to come nearer our boat than at first I expected, but I lay ready for him, for I had loaded my gun with all possible expedition, and bade Zuri load both the others. As soon as he came fairly within my reach, I fired, and shot him directly in the head. Immediately, he sank down into the water, but rose instantly, and plunged up and down as if he was struggling for life, and so indeed he was. He immediately made to the shore, but between the wound, which was his mortal hurt, and the strangling of the water, he died just before he reached the shore. It is impossible to express the astonishment of those poor negroes at the noise and the fire of my gun. But when they saw that the creature was dead and sunk in the water, and that I made signs to them to come to the shore, they took heart and came to the shore and began to search for the creature. I found him by his blood staining the water. By the help of a rope which I slung round him and gave the negroes to haul, they dragged him on shore and found that he was a most curious leopard, spotted and fine to an admirable degree. The negroes held up their hands with admiration to think what it was that I had killed him with. The other creature, frightened with the flash of fire and the noise of the gun, swam to shore and ran up directly to the mountains from whence they had come, nor could I at that distance know what he was. I quickly found that the negroes were for eating the flesh of this creature, so I was willing to have them take it as a favor from me. They offered me some of the flesh, which I declined, making as if I would give it to them, but I made signs for the skin, which they gave me very freely. They brought me, too, a great deal more of their provision, which, though I did not understand, yet I accepted. Then I made signs to them for some water, and held out one of my jars to them, turning it bottom upward to show that it was empty, and that I wanted to have it filled. They called immediately to some of their friends, and 2 women came and brought a great vessel made of earth and burnt, as I suppose, in the sun. This they sat down for me, as before, and I sent Zuri on shore with my jars, and filled them all 3. I was now furnished with roots and grains, such as it was, and water, and leaving my friendly negroes, I made forward for about 11 days more, without offering to go near the shore, till I saw the land run out a great length into the sea, at about the distance of 4 or 5 leagues before me. The sea being very calm, I kept a large offing to make this point. At length, doubling the point at about 2 leagues from the land, I saw plainly land on the other side to seaward. Then I concluded, as it was most certain indeed, that this was Cape Verde, and those the islands, called from thence Cape Verde Islands. However, they were at a great distance, and I could not tell what I had best do, for if I should be taken with a fresh of wind, I might reach neither one nor the other. Not knowing what to do in this dilemma, I went into the cabin and sat down to think. Zuri had the helm, and suddenly he cried out, "Master, master, a ship with a sail!" I jumped out of the cabin, and immediately saw the ship, and saw that it was a Portuguese ship, and, as I thought, was bound to the coast of Guinea for negroes. but when I observed the course she steered, I was soon convinced that they were bound some other way, and did not design to come any nearer to the shore. Thereupon I stretched out to sea as much as I could, resolving to speak with them if possible. With all the sail I could make, I found I should not be able to come in their way, but they would be gone by before I could make any signal to them. But after I had crowded to the utmost and began to despair, they, it seemed, saw me by the help of their perspective glasses. They saw that it was some European boat, which, as they supposed, must belong to some ship that was lost, so they shortened sail to let me come up. I was encouraged by this, and as I had my patron's flag on board, I made a waft of it to them for a signal of distress, and fired a gun, both of which they saw, for they told me they saw the smoke, though they did not hear the gun. Upon these signals they very kindly brought to and lay by for me, and in about 3 hours' time I came up with them. They asked me what I was in Portuguese, in Spanish, and in French, but I understood none of them. At last the Scottish sailor who was on board called to me, and I answered him and told him that I was an Englishman, and that I had made my escape out of slavery from the Moors at Sallee. Then they bade me come on board, and very kindly took me in and all my goods. It was inexpressible joy to me, more than anyone would believe, that I was thus delivered, as I esteemed it, from such a miserable and almost hopeless condition as I was in. I immediately offered all I had to the captain of the ship as a return for my deliverance, but he generously told me that he would take nothing from me. He assured me that all that I had should be delivered safe to me when I came to the Brazils. For, he said, I have saved your life on no other terms than I would be glad to be saved myself. It may one time or other be my lot to be taken up in the same condition. Besides, he said, when I carry you to the Brazils, so great a way from your own country, if I should take away from you what you have, you will be starved there, and then I only take away that life I have given. No, senor, Mr. Englishman, I will carry you thither in charity, and those things will help you to buy your subsistence there, and your passage home again. As he was charitable in his proposal, so he was just in the performance to a tittle, for he ordered the seamen that none should offer to touch anything I had. Then he took everything into his own possession, and gave me back an exact inventory of them, that I might have them. He even included my earthen jars. As to my boat, it was a very good one, and that he saw, and told me he would buy it of me for the ship's use, and asked me what I would have for it. I told him that he had been so generous to me in everything that I could not offer to make any price of the boat, but left it entirely to him. Upon this, he told me that he would give me a note of his hand to pay me 80 pieces of 8 for it at Brazil, and when it came there, if anyone offered to give more, he would make it up. He offered me also 60 pieces of 8 more for my boy Zuri, which I was loath to take. Not that I was not willing to let the captain have him, but I was very loath to sell the poor boy's liberty, since he had assisted me so faithfully in procuring my own. However, when I let the captain know my reason, he owned it to be just, and offered me this compromise, that he would promise to set the boy free in 10 years if he turned Christian. Upon this, when Zuri said he was willing to go to him, I let the captain have him. We'll stop there and start next time with Chapter 3. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.